All right, let's get into it. Today, we're tackling a big one. It's probably one of the most influential and for sure one of the most controversial books out there, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. People call it all sorts of things. A manual for the ruthless, a modern version of The Prince, even an essential guide to how the world really works behind the scenes. So just to give you a taste of what we're getting into, check out Law 15. Yeah, there's no gray area there, right? No room for mercy. And it's exactly this kind of cold, stark advice that gives the book its fearsome reputation. Greene's whole point is that if you leave even one tiny spark of your enemy's power, you're basically just waiting for it to burst back into a wildfire. And that really brings us to the big question we're going to explore today. Is this book just showing us the world as it is? A cold, hard game of power that we're all playing, whether we like it or not? Or is it something more dangerous, like a handbook that actually teaches people how to manipulate and dominate everyone around them? To figure that out, we've got to break down the core themes of Greene's whole philosophy. First up, let's talk about mastering your own image. See, for Greene, power doesn't start with attacking other people. It starts with mastering yourself. The foundation of everything is controlling how you're perceived. Because really, before you can influence anybody, you have to be the absolute master of your own reputation. This right here is the heart of it. Your reputation. It walks into the room before you do. It is your single most valuable asset. If you have a strong one, you can win battles without even fighting. But a weak one, it just leaves you wide open to attack. The book is just packed with stories of historical figures whose power completely hinged on their public image. So the takeaway is simple. You have to build it, and you have to defend it like your life depends on it. Now here's where things get really interesting. You look at Law 4, and it's all about being mysterious, saying less. But then you get to Law 6, and it's telling you to go out and grab the spotlight at all costs. So, do they contradict each other? Well, Greene would say absolutely not. It's all about context. Real power is knowing when you need to be quiet and mysterious and when you need to be a total spectacle. And this kind of sums up the whole theme. The goal is to not just accept the role that society or other people hand you. No, you have to forge your own identity, one that you've designed to command attention and to serve your own goals. You and you alone get to be the author of your own story. Okay, so once you've got a handle on your own image, you have to actually take it out into the world. That brings us to our next theme, navigating the social game. And let me tell you, it's a tricky one. This is where the book gets, you could say really cynical, or maybe just realistic, depending on how you see it. Greene is pulling these lessons from the courts of kings, from the backrooms of politics, and they paint a picture of human relationships as a total minefield. Basically, don't make your boss feel threatened. Be super careful with your friends, because envy can destroy everything. Prove your point with what you do, not what you say. And when you need something from someone, don't ask for their mercy. Show them what's in it for them. And this quote from Law 19, man, it just hammers home how high the stakes are. The world is full of all kinds of different people, and you just can't treat everyone the same way. If you misjudge someone, if you offend the wrong person, you could literally make an enemy for life. So social intelligence in this world isn't about being nice. It's about survival. Which brings us to our third and final theme. This is where we move from defense and social maneuvering into pure offense. This is all about taking action, planning your moves like a chess grandmaster, and then executing those moves with absolute precision. You can see how these laws basically lay out an entire strategic campaign. First, Law 29, you plan everything out, not just your first move, but all the way to the very end. Then, with Law 31, you set up the game so that any choice your opponent makes, it still helps you. When the time comes to act, Law 28 says you have to strike with boldness, no hesitation. And then, and this is so important, Law 47 warns you to know when you've won and stop. Don't let your success make you arrogant and push you too far. So what's the ultimate law? The one that kind of ties them all together? That's Law 48, assume formlessness. What does that mean? It means don't be predictable. Don't have one rigid plan that your enemy can figure out and counter. You need to be like water, fluid, adaptable, impossible to get a grip on. Because in a world that is always changing, real power is being able to change right along with it. So we've looked at mastering your image, playing the social game, and using strategy to get ahead. But what does it all really mean when you put it together? Let's zoom out for a second and think about the big picture here. 48. Just think about that number. This isn't just a few helpful tips. It's a complete, interlocking system for how to see the world. It's an entire arsenal of tools for the game of power.
The number itself suggests that this game is being played everywhere, all the time, on 1,000 different fronts.
And that brings us right back to where we started. Is Robert Greene just holding up a mirror to reality, showing us the brutal, timeless truth of human ambition? Or does a book like this actually make the world a worse place, creating more suspicion and more manipulation? Is it a tool you use to defend yourself, or is it a weapon you use to attack? That's the real question the 48 Laws of Power leaves you with. And the answer? Well, that's
Talk
for you to
about one of the
decide.
most fundamental and, honestly, one of the most counterintuitive laws of power. It's a principle that really goes against everything we're taught about showing off our talents. But, understanding this one idea can be the difference between rising to the top and a sudden, completely unexpected fall. So, what does that even mean? Well, think about it. In your desire to please your boss or impress people, you might be tempted to show them just how smart or talented you are. But that can totally backfire. Instead of admiration, you inspire fear and insecurity. So, what's the goal then? Simple. It's to make your masters appear more brilliant than they are. If you can do that, you will reach the heights of power. It's a fair question, right? I mean, we're all told to shine, to stand out from the crowd. But what happens when your brilliance casts a shadow on someone more powerful than you? To really get the danger here, we're going to need to travel back to 17th century France. So let's dive into a powerful cautionary tale. We're about to meet a guy who, on the surface, had it all, only to lose every last bit of it in a single night. And his mistake? He completely failed to understand this one crucial law. So this is Nicolas Fouquet. He was the finance minister for King Louis XIV. He was brilliant, he was essential to the king, and man, did he live a life of incredible extravagance. In 1661, he was pretty sure he was about to be promoted to prime minister. But he kind of sensed he was falling out of favor, and he figured he needed some kind of grand gesture to win the king back. So Fouquet comes up with a plan. He decides he's going to throw the most magnificent, over-the-top party the world had ever seen at his brand new chateau. And the guest of honor? The king himself. Now, this wasn't just a party, it was a strategic move. He wanted to show off his loyalty, his amazing taste, and just how valuable he was to the crown. And the party was an absolute sensation. We're talking 7-course dinners, fireworks, even a brand new play by Molière. But as you can see from this timeline, things went south fast. The very next day, he's arrested. His sentence? 20 years in solitary confinement. I mean, what a stunning, unbelievable fall from grace. And this slide right here, this gets to the absolute heart of the problem. On the left, you see what Fouquet thought he was doing, showing loyalty and proving his worth. But on the right, we see what King Louis XIV, the Sun King, actually saw. He saw a finance minister who was more popular, more charming, and whose house was way more magnificent than his own palace. It didn't inspire loyalty. It inspired deep insecurity and really, really offended the king's vanity. The writer Voltaire just summed it up perfectly. In the span of just a few hours, Fouquet went from the absolute pinnacle of French society to a forgotten prisoner. His crime wasn't being disloyal. It was outshining the master. Okay, but Fouquet's fate isn't, inevitable. Let's shift gears and turn to another brilliant mind, Galileo Galilei. He faced a similar challenge with a powerful patron, but he engineered a completely different and way more successful outcome. So back in the early 1600s, Galileo was a certified genius, but he was constantly worried about money. He had to rely on the generosity of these different patrons who would pay him in gifts, not a steady salary. He was always begging for support, and he knew there had to be a better way. And this slide lays out his absolutely brilliant strategy. After he discovers the moons of Jupiter, he doesn't just announce it as a scientific fact. No, he turns it into this cosmic tribute. He dedicates the entire discovery to the Medici family. He links the 4 moons to the 4 Medici sons, and basically claims the heavens themselves are honoring their power. It's genius. And the result? It was a total coup. Galileo was given a full-time, salaried position as the official court philosopher. His days of begging were completely over. He secured his future, not just with his amazing discovery, but with how he presented it. So let's just boil it down to the critical difference right here. Fouquet made himself the star of the show, which made his master, the king, feel small. Galileo, on the other hand, used his genius to make his patron, the Medici, shine more brilliantly than anyone else. See? He didn't outshine the master. He made the master outshine everybody else.
Okay, so these are fascinating stories from history. But how do we actually apply these lessons today? Because let's be real, the dynamics of power, ego, and vanity haven't changed all that much.
To really get this, there are two fundamental realities you just have to accept. First, sometimes your natural charm or your talent is enough to make a superior feel insecure. You might not even be trying to. And second, never, ever take your position for granted. Favor from a boss can vanish in an instant if you forget who put you there in the first place. So let's talk practicalities. Here are the big don'ts. You have to resist the urge to constantly show off how talented you are. Be humble. Don't act entitled. And you have to be so careful about seeming wittier or smarter than your boss, especially in front of other people. It is a surefire way to stir up resentment. Instead, you want to practice the art of what we could call discreet flattery. If you have a great idea, you can credit them with inspiring it. Ask for their advice, even if you don't really need it. Masters absolutely love to share their wisdom. Your goal is to make them the center of attention, the sun. You're just there to help them shine. But of course, like any good rule, this one has a crucial exception. You can't spend your whole life hiding in the shadows. So now, let's look at those strategic moments when you absolutely should shine. The key here is to be strategic. This is not about being a doormat to every single person you meet. It's about understanding the power dynamics with your direct superiors. You have to choose your moments, and you have to choose your battles very, very carefully. And this table gives us a really clear framework. Is your superior a falling star? Are they already weak and losing their grip on power? Well, then outshining them can actually help speed up their decline and open up a path for you. But if they're firmly in their position, your strategy has to be patience. You wait. Power inevitably fades, and if you've played your cards right, you'll be there to take their place. I love this image because it just captures the entire philosophy. There can only be one sun in the sky. Don't try to compete with its brilliance. Instead, you fade into the background and find ways to make that master star shine even brighter. Your own power, believe it or not, will grow in that reflected glory. And that leaves us with one final question to think about. We are constantly pushed to build our personal brand, be the star. But as we've seen today, sometimes the greatest power doesn't come from shining the brightest, but from strategically choosing when and for whom to dim your own light. All right, let's dive into an idea today that on the surface feels completely wrong. We're always told, keep your friends close. But what if, in the game of power and ambition, your enemies are actually your greatest asset? I mean, just listen to this from the philosopher Voltaire almost 300 years ago. Lord, protect me from my friends. It feels totally backward, right? But stick with me because we're going to unpack why this wild idea might just be one of the most crucial lessons in human dynamics. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the paradox itself, then look at a friendship that ended, well, pretty badly. We'll contrast that with an emperor's genius move, dig into the psychology of why this works, and then talk about how to use this idea for yourself. So what's the big idea here? It's that in the strategic game of life, your friends can actually be way more dangerous than your enemies. And why is that? Well, it's because that closeness, that intimacy of friendship, it's the perfect breeding ground for one of the most toxic human emotions out there, envy. To really see this in action, we're going to look at two incredible, true stories from history. And we're going to start with a really tragic one, a cautionary tale about a ruler who put all his faith in a friend and paid the ultimate price for it. Okay, so let's jump in a time machine. We're going back to the Byzantine Empire, mid-9th century. We've got Michael III, a young new emperor on the throne. And his court? It's basically a snake pit, full of schemers and backstabbers. He is desperate for anyone he can really trust. So who does he turn to? His best friend, a guy named Basilius. Now, Basilius started as a humble stable hand. He'd once saved Michael's life from a runaway horse. And as a thank you, Michael just showered him with everything. He educated him, gave him gifts, turned him into a sophisticated member of the court. I mean, Basilius literally owed his entire new life to the emperor. Who could possibly be more loyal? You'd think nobody, right? And just watch how fast this escalates. Michael's generosity is off the charts. First, Basilius is head of stables. Then, boom, he's chief counselor. Then, Basilius convinces Michael to have his own ambitious uncle murdered. And guess who slides right into that power vacuum? Yep, Basilius. He becomes head of the army. Michael has, step by painful step, turned his stable boyfriend into one of the most powerful men in the entire empire. And with all that power came an incredible, insatiable greed. This is where it all goes wrong. Michael finds himself in a bit of financial trouble, so he goes to his buddy Basilius and asks for some of the money back. You know, the vast fortune he'd given him. And Basilius's response? He flat out refuses, with his look of total disrespect. And in that one moment, Michael must have realized he'd created a monster. His trust, his friendship, it blinded him until it was way, way too late. Just a few weeks after that confrontation, Basilius sent soldiers into Michael's bedroom. They stabbed the emperor to death while Basilius watched. And then the former stable hand rode through the city streets as the brand new emperor with his best friend's head on a pike. Just a horrifying end to a story of misplaced trust. Okay, so that was a total disaster. Now let's flip the script and look at a completely different approach with a completely different outcome. We're now in 10th century China. Emperor Sung has just taken the throne, and he knows the history. Emperors in his position are constantly getting knocked off by their own powerful, supposedly friendly generals. He is not going to let that happen to him. Emperor Sung saw this situation with absolute clarity. He knew his top generals weren't really his friends. They were a pack of wolves just waiting for the right moment to pounce. But instead of plotting against them or living in fear, he came up with a truly brilliant plan to just break the cycle of violence. His strategy was a work of art. First, he throws this massive banquet for all his generals, gets them comfortable, lots of wine. Then he sends the guards away, so it's just them. And instead of accusing them, he empathizes with them. He basically says, look, I get it. I'm sure one day your men will force you to take my throne. How could you possibly refuse? And then he offers them the deal of a lifetime. Give up your armies, and I will give you huge estates and a life of total luxury and peace. And the contrast here is it's stunning. Look at them side by side. Michael gave his friend power, and that power bred envy and got him killed. Sung, on the other hand, gave his supposed friends wealth and a golden parachute, turning a pack of dangerous wolves into happy, docile retirees with zero power. But Sung didn't even stop there. He took it to a whole other level. He would actively seek out his former enemies, rival kings he defeated, and instead of executing them, he'd pardon them. He'd give them jobs in his court. One time, he even found proof that a former enemy was still plotting against him, and he just handed the proof back to the guy, showing he knew but was sparing him anyway. This incredible generosity created this powerful bond of gratitude, turning his biggest threats into his most loyal ally. This quote from Abraham Lincoln just perfectly sums up Emperor Sung's entire strategy. He didn't just defeat his enemies on the battlefield, he destroyed the enmity itself. He transformed a threat into an unbreakable bond built on pure, unadulterated gratitude. So we've seen the what, we've seen the stories. But now let's get into the why. What is actually going on in our heads that makes a friend so potentially dangerous and a former enemy so surprisingly reliable? Well, it all boils down to this epic battle between two forces, envy and gratitude. See, when you hire a friend, you're walking into a psychological minefield. You don't see their flaws because you're friends. Your act of kindness, which you think is helpful, can secretly feel condescending to them, like charity. And any gratitude they feel at first, it quickly starts to feel like a heavy burden. And that burden curdles into resentment, which then blooms into secret festering envy. It all comes down to their core motivation. The friend you hire often starts to feel entitled. They think, hey, we're buddies, you kind of owe me this. But the converted enemy? They expected nothing but ruin, and instead, you gave them a second chance. They expect zero and are grateful for everything. They feel like they have to prove themselves to you, which makes them work that much harder. And hey, this isn't some new agey idea. The Roman historian Tacitus absolutely nailed it 2,000 years ago. He said, gratitude is a burden, a psychological debt we want to get rid of. But revenge, that's a pleasure. It's just our raw, powerful insight in the human nature that explains this whole dynamic perfectly. Okay, so this brings us to our final and maybe most powerful point. What if we just stopped seeing our enemies as a threat that needs to be crushed and started seeing them as an untapped resource, a valuable asset that can actually make us stronger? Seriously, think about it. Having a clear enemy forces you to be sharper, more focused, more alert. You can't get lazy. In fact, Mao Zedong used to say that without a worthy opponent, people get complacent. An enemy clarifies what you stand for by clearly defining what you stand against. So what's the big takeaway here? The real key to getting things done isn't about surrounding yourself with people you like to hang out with. It's about surrounding yourself with the most skilled and competent people, period. Keep your friends for friendship, cherish it, protect it. But when it comes to the critical work of advancing your interests, you need to rely on strategic alliances, even, and maybe especially, with people who were once on the other side. I'll leave you with this one final thought to chew on. Next time you're building a team or deciding who to trust, just ask yourself this question. Who is truly more motivated to see you win? The person who feels entitled to your help, or the person who feels they owe you everything for the chance you gave them? The answer might just change the way you see everyone in your life.
All right, let's get right into it. Have you ever felt like maybe being a totally open book is, well, holding you back? Today, we're going to tear apart a core principle of strategy, one that kind of goes against everything we're taught about honesty. We're talking about the incredible power of hiding what you're really up to.
So this is our launching point. It's a pretty bold idea, isn't it? But the logic is brutally simple. If your opponents, or even your allies, have no earthly idea what your end game is, how can they possibly get in your way? By the time they figure it out, you've already won. So here's the game plan for today. We're going to start with why being too honest can actually be a huge liability. Then we'll dive into two really powerful strategies, the red herring and the smokescreen, and look at some wild case studies. After that, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how to master this art, and, just as important, when it can all blow up in your face. Okay, first things first, why is any of this even necessary? Well, the basic problem is that most of us are way too open. We just broadcast our feelings and plans without even thinking, and that makes us incredibly easy to read, to predict, and, let's be honest, to outmaneuver.
I mean, think about it, right? Constant, unfiltered honesty? It's not just about ruffling feathers. It makes you a known quantity. And in any strategic game, business, politics, even dating, being predictable is a massive weakness. The real power, the real respect, that goes to the people who always keep you guessing.
So, how do you stop being so predictable? Well, our first big strategy is the red herring. Now, this isn't just about keeping your mouth shut. Oh no. This is about actively misleading people, dangling some shiny false goal in front of them to send them running in the complete wrong direction. And to see how this works and how it can spectacularly fail, we have the perfect story. Let's talk about the young, lovesick Marquise de Sévigné. He was getting coached by a true master of seduction, Ninon de L'Enclos, who had laid out this incredibly elaborate step-by-step plan for him to win over a countess.
Okay, just look at this contrast. It's night and day. On the left, you've got Ninon's genius, patient plan, all designed to build mystery and desire over time. On the right, you've got what the Marquis actually did. In one impulsive moment, he just threw all his cards on the table. And by revealing his intention, by blurting out his love, he didn't seem sincere. He seemed desperate, conniving. The mystery just evaporated. The spell was completely broken.
Now, let's see how this is done by a master. We're leaving the French salons and heading into the world of high-stakes politics with a young Otto von Bismarck, a guy with a huge, secret ambition to unify Germany, all under the control of Prussia. Bismarck's speech calling for peace with Austria was the ultimate red herring. He stood up in public and argued passionately for a cause he privately hated. This single move fooled everybody. The king was so impressed, he made Bismarck a cabinet minister. And from that position of power, Bismarck spent years quietly building the very war machine he would later use to achieve his real goal, smashing Austria and unifying Germany. Now that is playing the long game.
All right, let's shift gears to our second strategy, which is even more subtle. We're talking about the smokescreen. This isn't about a flashy decoy. It's the opposite. It's about hiding your true intentions behind something so normal, so familiar, so mind-numbingly boring that nobody even bothers to give it a second look.
This old con is the perfect illustration. The con man, Yellow Kid Whale, didn't pitch his victim some crazy get-rich-quick scheme. No, he used a totally plausible, almost dull business deal, selling a hunting lodge, as his cover. His target, Sam Giesel, got so wrapped up in the normal details of the sale that he didn't even notice the real trap being set, this side drama with a fixed boxing match. The ordinary business deal was the perfect smokescreen.
And we see this exact same principle in a political showdown in 1920s Ethiopia. The future Emperor Haile Selassie was facing off against a powerful, rebellious warlord named Balcha. And Balcha doesn't just show up for a meeting. He brings a 10,000-man army with him to the capital. suspicious of everything. So Balcha was incredibly paranoid. He was sure the banquet Selassie invited him to was a trap, and Selassie used that paranoia as the ultimate smokescreen. He let Balcha bring hundreds of armed guards inside. He was charming and deferential. So while Balcha was sitting there feeling smug, powerful, and totally in control, 3 miles away, Selassie's men weren't fighting Balcha's main army. They were buying every single one of their guns with baskets of cash. Checkmate. Selassie used the warlord's own suspicion as the perfect cover for the real move.
Okay, so we've seen these strategies in love, in war, in politics. But what are the actual practical tactics that make them work? Let's pop the hood and look at the deceiver's playbook.
These are really the essential tools. You've got false sincerity. If you seem earnest enough, people will just assume you're being honest. Then there's the noble gesture, like Bismarck's peace speech, which creates an appearance that people want to believe. You can also create a pattern. Do the same thing over and over, lulling your opponent to sleep, and then you do something completely different. Sometimes the best move is to just blend in seamlessly with the crowd, hiding in plain sight. And of course, there's the classic poker face, a completely unreadable expression that gives nothing away.
But, and this is a really important but, this approach is not foolproof. There are absolutely times when trying to be deceptive can not only fail, but it can blow up right in your face, especially after you've built a reputation for it.
So what do you do when your cover is blown? When everyone already knows you're a trickster? If you keep trying to use decoys and smokescreens, you just look like a fool. Well, the answer, paradoxically enough, comes from the ultimate showman himself, P.T. Barnum.
Barnum's absolute genius was that he didn't run from his reputation for humbuggery. He embraced it. He basically advertised it. The public knew he was pulling a fast one, and they loved him for it. Being in on the joke was part of the fun. By owning his reputation, he could keep running his schemes, but now the audience was his willing accomplice.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big question to chew on. We've talked all about the power of concealing your intentions. It's clearly a potent tool for getting what you want, but it operates in a really murky, gray area. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Where do you personally draw the line between brilliant strategy and just plain manipulation?
You know, when you think about power, you probably think about big speeches, bold statements. But what if your greatest weapon isn't what you say at all, but what you don't say? Today, we're diving into the incredible power of strategic silence. So let's start with this core idea. Think about it for a second. The moment you open your mouth, you're kind of putting yourself out there, right? You're vulnerable. Every single word could be a mistake, something that makes you seem, well, common, or even worse, something that makes you lose control of the whole situation. Okay, so this all boils down to one fundamental principle, a core rule of power. We're going to call it the law of saying less. So let's unpack what that actually means. All right, so the core concept here is that real power, it doesn't shout, it whispers. It's not about making these long, grand speeches. It's about being incredibly brief and deliberate. See, when you say less than you need to, you create this vacuum. And people, they can't stand a vacuum. They get uncomfortable, they get anxious, and they rush to fill that silence. And in doing so, they reveal everything about themselves. While you've revealed nothing. And this isn't some new idea, not at all. We're talking ancient wisdom here. Over 500 years ago, Leonardo da Vinci painted this perfect picture. He said to imagine an oyster, right? It opens its shell wide, and a crab sees its chance. It scuttles over, wedges a little stone inside so the oyster can't close up again. And just like that, the oyster is lunch. The lesson? It's as true today as it was then. An open mouth can get you eaten alive. Okay, to really see what happens when you ignore this rule, we need a story, a really good cautionary tale. So let me introduce you to Coriolanus. He was a Roman war hero, a total legend. But all his victories, all his glory, it was all undone by one single fatal flaw. The guy just could not keep his mouth shut. His fall from grace is just wow. It's like a masterclass in how to destroy your own life. And it all happens over 4 disastrous speeches. So at first, he's the strong, silent hero. He just shows off his battle scars, doesn't say a word. And the people, they absolutely love him for it. But then pride gets the better of him. He starts boasting to his wealthy buddies, not realizing the common folk are listening in. He loses the election, and instead of taking it on the chin, he goes on this rant, attacking the very idea of democracy. And the final nail in the coffin, he gets one last chance to apologize, and what does he do? He just hurls insults. Game over. So with every word he spoke, he was just chipping away at his own legend. That mysterious, powerful war hero, gone. In his place was just a common, arrogant braggart. He couldn't control his own words, so how could the people of Rome trust him to control anything else? They didn't just banish him, they threw a party when he left.
All right, so that's a perfect example of what not to do. Now, let's flip the coin and look at someone who was an absolute master of this law. A man who basically built his power on saying almost nothing, King Louis XIV of France. You have to picture the scene in his court. It was just a stark contrast. You had his courtiers and ministers just talking for days, arguing, debating, scheming. And in the process, they were revealing all their plans, all their weaknesses. And Louis? He'd just sit there, in total silence. His face was like a stone mask, completely unreadable. By saying nothing, he was in control of everything. And he had this one phrase that was his signature move, his ultimate weapon. A minister would come in, give this long, passionate, detailed presentation, and when they were done, Louis would just look at them and say, "I shall see." Just 3 words, and it was absolutely devastating. I mean, these powerful men would leave the room and just spiral for weeks, tearing their hair out, trying to figure out what he meant, what was his tone, how was he sitting. It drove them crazy. See, Louis XIV got it. He understood that by saying almost nothing, he forced everyone else to fill that uncomfortable silence. And they would talk and talk and talk, revealing all sorts of useful information that he could file away and use later. His silence was never passive. Oh no, it was an active, powerful weapon. So we've seen how it works in practice, but why does it work? What are the mechanics behind the mystery? What gives silence so much psychological power? Let's break it down. It really comes down to 3 key psychological effects. First, when you're quiet, people assume you're profound. They project all their ideas of wisdom and depth onto you. Second, your silence makes other people really uncomfortable. They can't handle it, so they start chattering away nervously. And guess what? They give up the goods. They reveal their weaknesses. And finally, and this one is just pure common sense, you can't get in trouble for something you never said. It's the ultimate way to avoid risk. And hey, this isn't just for ancient kings or Roman generals. Think about the artist Andy Warhol. He figured this out big time. He realized that the more he tried to explain his art, the less powerful it became. So what did he do? He started giving these really vague, bizarre interviews, and the less he said, the more people argued about what he meant, and the more valuable his art became. Brilliant, right? But you know, for the most chilling example of why you should say less than necessary, we have to go to Russia during the Decembrist uprising. There's this rebel leader, Kondraty Ryliev, and he's about to be hanged. The trapdoor opens, he falls, but the rope breaks. Now, back then, an event like that was seen as an act of God, a divine pardon. He's saved. So there he is, on the ground, alive against all odds. He's been given a second chance. But in that one moment of relief, he makes a fatal mistake. He just can't help himself. He looks at the crowd, at his executioners, and shouts out this sarcastic joke. So, a messenger runs to the Tsar to report this miracle. The Tsar, hearing about the broken rope, starts to write up a pardon. But then he stops, and he asks the messenger, "Did Ryliev say anything after this so-called miracle?" The messenger, being honest, repeats the joke, and the Tsar just slowly tears the pardon in half. In that case, he says, "We'll prove him wrong." The next day, they hanged Ryliev again, and this time the rope didn't break. It's a brutal lesson, but a clear one. Once your words are out there, you can't take them back. Okay, so after hearing that, you're probably thinking, so I should just never talk again? Well, no, of course not. Is silence always the best strategy? Absolutely not. Real power is all about being adaptable. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is actually open your mouth and speak. You see, knowing the rule is one thing, but a true master of power knows when to break the rule. So let's talk about the reversal, when saying more is the right move. Because you have to be careful with this. Silence can backfire. If you're silent with your boss, for instance, they might not think you're profound. They might think you're hiding something or that you just don't know what you're doing. And sometimes saying just a few vague words is even worse than saying nothing, because people will take those words and twist them into whatever they want them to mean. And this leads us to the ultimate power move, the reversal. Using a flood of words as a kind of smokescreen. Think about it. If you play the part of the chatty, harmless person who just won't shut up, what happens? People's guards go down.
They dismiss you. They don't see you as a threat at all. And that gives you the perfect cover to work on your real goals, completely under the radar. So what's the big takeaway here? It's not about being silent all the time. It's about being deliberate. Real power is in the calibration. It's knowing exactly when to speak, what to say, and when to just step back and let the incredible force of your silence do the talking. So here's a thought to leave you with. The next time you're in a conversation that really matters, ask yourself, where does my power really lie? Is it in the words I'm about to say, or is it in the ones I have the strength to hold?
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're digging into a fundamental element of power that most people just overlook, and that's silence. We're going to explore this idea that saying less can often get you so much more than talking a whole lot.
Okay, let's really get into this. It's a powerful idea, right? Because it kind of goes against everything we're taught, to persuade people, to impress them with our words. But what you're about to see is that real control, real power, it doesn't come from what you say. It comes from what you deliberately choose not to say.
All right, so let's start with a basic rule here, the absolute core of this idea. When you're trying to impress people, talking more, it actually makes you seem, well, ordinary, less in control. But saying less, that's what makes you seem powerful, profound, almost mysterious.
And look, this is not some new idea. We're talking centuries ago. Leonardo da Vinci nailed this with a perfect metaphor. He talked about an oyster. When the moon is full, it opens its shell wide. A crab sees this, right? It drops a little stone inside, and just like that, the oyster can't close. It's become a meal. Da Vinci's point couldn't be clearer. An open mouth is a weakness.
So what happens when someone completely ignores this rule? Breaks it in the most spectacular way possible? Well, for that, we need to look at the tragic story of a Roman hero named Coriolanus. This guy was an absolute legend on the battlefield, but when it came to politics, he was a total disaster. And his downfall was just unbelievably fast. Just look at this timeline. He starts out in 454 BC as this celebrated war hero. Everyone loves him. But then his speeches get arrogant and he just alienates everybody. And does he apologize? Nope. He doubles down, throws out more insults. Think about that. Just 4 speeches. That's all it took to completely self-destruct. He went from a living legend to a hated exile.
So here's the key takeaway, right? Coriolanus earned all this incredible power through his actions on the battlefield, but he threw it all the way with his words. The moment he couldn't control his tongue, he basically showed everyone he couldn't control himself. And if you can't control yourself, well, nobody's going to think you're worthy of respect, much less power.
Okay, so that's the cautionary tale. Now let's flip the script and look at a true master of this law, someone who did the absolute opposite of Coriolanus. We're talking about King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. And this just shows the power dynamic he built so perfectly. Imagine his court. Everyone's chattering away, nonstop. They're debating, they're arguing, they're desperately trying to figure out what he wants. And Louis? He just listens, silent, completely unreadable. His go-to response, even for the biggest, most complicated plans, was just as simple, "I shall see." And those 3 little words kept everyone guessing, totally off balance and completely under his thumb.
You see, his brevity, his short answers, that was his weapon. Nobody ever knew exactly what he was thinking, so they couldn't just tell him what he wanted to hear to trick him. Instead, they just kept talking and talking. And in the process, they'd reveal their own plans, their own weaknesses. His silence wasn't just him being quiet, it was a carefully built strategy, the very foundation of his absolute power.
So why does this work so well? Why is silence so incredibly effective? It's not just about looking mysterious. There's real psychology at play here. Let's break down exactly what's going on in people's heads when you say less than necessary.
Okay, think about it. We humans are basically interpretation machines. We hate not knowing what other people are thinking. So when you stay quiet, when you control what you reveal, you create this void. And that void makes people really uncomfortable. So what do? They rush to fill it. They start talking, making assumptions, chattering nervously. And in that process, they reveal way more than they ever meant to. Your silence basically forces their hand.
And this isn't just a strategy for kings and politicians, not at all. You see it in the art world too. Artists like Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp were masters of this. Warhol figured out really early that the less he explained his own work, the more everyone else would talk about it. All their interpretations, all their arguments and analysis, it just added to the mystery and, frankly, the value of his art. He just let other people create the meaning for him.
but for a really chilling example of just how dangerous unnecessary words can be, and I mean fatally dangerous, we have to look at the story of a Russian rebel named Kondraty Ryliev. He was sentenced to be hanged back in 1825.
So picture this. He's on the gallows, the trapdoor opens, but the rope breaks. Now back then, something like that was almost always seen as a sign from God, divine intervention. The person was almost always pardoned. But as Ryliev gets back on his feet, instead of just keeping his mouth shut, he can't help himself. He makes a sarcastic comment about the state.
So, a messenger rushes this news to the Tsar, Nicholas I, who's literally in the middle of signing the pardon. But then the messenger repeats what Ryliev said, and the Tsar just says, "In that case, let us prove the contrary," and rips up the pardon. The very next day, Ryliev was hanged again, this time successfully. It's such a brutal, fatal lesson, isn't it? Once your words are out there, you can never, ever take them back.
Okay, but this brings up a really important question. Is silence always the best strategy? And the answer is no. Like any rule of power, there are exceptions. And knowing when to break the rule is just as important as knowing the rule in the first place.
So let's look at that exception, the reversal. Sometimes silence isn't powerful at all. It's just suspicious. Think about it. If you're dealing with your boss or someone in authority, being too quiet can make it seem like you're hiding something, or maybe even being defiant. In those situations, silence can really backfire.
And this is where it gets interesting. The reversal is that by talking more, you can actually seem weaker, less intelligent, basically harmless. It's a kind of smokescreen. People just don't suspect a talkative person of being clever or manipulative. So while the truly powerful often use silence, a really clever deceiver might use a flood of words to distract you and put you off your guard.
Because at the end of the day, it's all about control. Just think about the Oracle at Delphi. Her power didn't come from giving these long, detailed speeches. No, it came from these short, powerful, really vague statements that kings and generals would then scramble to figure out. The value was never in how many words she used, but in how much they weighed. So the next time you're about to speak, especially when the stakes are high, just pause for a second. Ask yourself this question. Because really understanding the difference between revealing your power and just giving it away, well, that's everything.